In this video, we're going to look at the economic and political causes of World War II. A lot happened between World War I and World War II. World War I ends in 1918, and World War II begins in 1939. In those 21 years, a lot happens in the United States and around the world. In 1919, the United States passed the 18th Amendment, which created prohibition, or not allowing alcohol to be made or sold in the United States. Between 1920 and 1929, we have a period known as the Roaring Twenties. There's electrification, where rural areas and urban areas are gaining more access to electricity. There's also new technologies like the washing machine, the stove, the vacuum, the radio, the Model T. The Wright brothers have had their first flight, and airplanes are becoming more common. So during this Roaring Twenties, there's a lot of change with technologies both in America and around the world. In 1929, though, we have the stock market crash on Black Tuesday. And what happens is this leads us into the Great Depression, which happens from 1929 up until around when World War II begins at the end of the 1930s, beginning of the 1940s. During this whole time period, we have the Great Migration, which is when 6 million African Americans leave the South and move north and west in the United States. This happens all the way up through the 1970s, but it starts during these 20 years between World War I and World War II. And we also have the Harlem Renaissance, when African American artists, painters, musicians all became very popular in their neighborhood in Harlem and across the United States. When the video pauses, write 3 things that happened between World War I and World War II on your notes. Economic and political conditions in Europe following World War I led to the rise of fascism and to World War II. Write the words economic and political on your notes when the video pauses. Economic is related to money. Anytime you hear the word economic, I want you to think about money and how money is being spent, how people are spending their money, and what is happening with the economy or how governments and people spend money in the world. Political is related to the government. You may have heard the word politics before when referring to the government. So political or politics is related to the government. Politicians work in the government. Write money and the government on your notes when the video pauses. We're going to look at the economic causes of World War II first. Europe experienced economic devastation after World War I. Remember, the entirety of World War I was fought in Europe. Countries like France and Germany and all those other countries in Europe had actual battles with trenches dug and cannons shot and fire shot happening on that land. So kind of similar what happened in the South after the Civil War during Reconstruction is what happened in Europe after World War I, and this cost money to rebuild. First of all, they lost lots of people, so they didn't have as many people back to work in businesses, and they had to rebuild their homes and their cities and their towns and their farms. Also, the Great Depression didn't just happen in America. It started in America, but it affects the whole world. There was a worldwide depression during that Great Depression. There was high war debt owed by Germany. At the end of World War I, Germany had to agree that they were the cause of the war and that they had to repay all of those countries that needed to rebuild. So they owed a lot of debt to the countries that they lost to. High inflation, which is when the dollar bill isn't worth as much. So, for example, inflation would be like when buying a piece of slice of bread cost $15 because each individual dollars isn't worth a lot. It's a complicated economic kind of idea, but that is what was happening after World War I. And there was also massive unemployment. Remember, in America, 25% of Americans were unemployed, meaning they wanted a job, but they couldn't find one. And that was happening in Europe as well. When the video pauses, write these 4 words on your notes. Inflation in Germany was so bad that money was more valuable as material to make things like kites and dresses rather than something that you would use to spend on buying a new kite. So, this is a German mark. It's one, two, three, four. Each of these is an individual German mark, which was like their dollar. And inflation was so bad, especially in Germany, that it became more valuable to use these dollar bills as a material to make something than it was to spend the dollar bill to buy something. This is a photograph of a German man. These are all stacks of German marks. I'm going to guess that maybe there's like 600, maybe 700, 800 German marks here. And he might be spending these hundreds of German marks on a loaf of bread. I'm not entirely sure about the exact kind of situation with that, whether that's the exact amount that would buy a loaf of bread, but it's not that far of an exaggeration from what they were experiencing then. We're going to look now at the political causes of World War II. The rise of fascism led to political instability in Europe. Fascism is a political philosophy in which total power is given to a dictator, individual freedoms are denied, and nationalism and racism are emphasized. Write these 2 words to complete your definition of fascism on your notes when the video pauses. Dictators across Europe started gaining more power. This is in part because people were angry about World War II and World War I and the devastation they experienced. They were angry about the economy, and so leaders like Mussolini from Italy, Tojo from Japan, and Hitler from Germany promised their people that they would be able to turn the economy around, bring prosperity back to the country, and so they were given power. And in a lot of cases, especially Hitler's, they were given power and then they took it and ran with it and got more and more power for themselves. Dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo promised their countries that they would fix the economic problems caused by World War I and the Great Depression. So here's an example of a newspaper headline: Von Hindenburg dies, that was the leader of Germany, and then Hitler takes charge. And over time, Hitler becomes the German dictator. So it takes a little bit of time for him to really take this power. When the video pauses, write the names and countries of the 3 dictators on your notes. Dictators in Germany, Italy, and Japan formed an alliance called the Axis powers, and they began to take land and power in Europe. Write alliance and axis on your notes when the video pauses. This is an example of a headline from September 1st, 1939. We can say that this is sort of the beginning of World War II. Germany, under the leadership of Hitler, started invading other countries like Poland. And this made European countries mad because Germany, under the conditions that they signed at the end of World War I, was not supposed to have a big military. They were not supposed to be spending money on the military, and they were definitely not supposed to be invading other countries. So when Germany does this in September 1939, Britain and France and other countries see this and they mobilize. And this is when Germany and the Axis powers and Britain and the Allied powers clash and when World War II begins. Thanks for watching this video.